So the story so far, if you ever watched the old Rocking Bullwinkle show. Anyway, Canada has the absolute advantage in everything, apples and oranges. Canada can make more of both than Australia. But we figured out that Australia has this comparative advantage in making apples, and only apples. Canada has a comparative advantage in making oranges. Or, I'm sorry, Australia has the comparative advantage in making oranges because it costs fewer apples. So, and I think I said that wrong in the last video, but whatever. You know what I'm saying. Australia has the comparative advantage in making oranges, so we're going to want Australia to make more oranges and Canada to make more apples. To see this in action, let's have a look at the PPFs for these two countries. So, for Australia, again, nice, simple, constant opportunity cost PPF. 50 apples if they only make apples, 150 oranges if they only make oranges. And let's say that, remember on a PPF, we don't know which of these points is optimal. We only know which is efficient. And let's say, without trading, Australia decided, well, 40 apples and 30 oranges, that's where we're happy. We're happier than we would be with 41 apples and whatever. So 40 apples, 30 oranges, that's what they get. Going over to Canada, 200 and 200. And let's say this is what they decided on, 100 of each. Now, already, they get 100 of each. Australia gets 40 and 30. Why does Canada even need to bother? They're doing better in terms of making these two goods. Well, even though they can make more of each, remember that whole comparative advantage thing. The opportunity cost of an apple is more in Australia, but the opportunity cost of oranges is more in Canada. So this first scenario here, we're looking at what happens if they specialize completely, meaning Canada decides that they're not going to make any more oranges. They're just going to make apples. That's where they have their comparative advantage. So they go from making 100 oranges and 100 apples to making 0 oranges and 200 apples. And then Australia, they also decide to specialize where they have their comparative advantage, which is with oranges, because oranges are cheaper in terms of apples. So they go from right here, where they were making 40 apples and 30 oranges, to now making 150 oranges and 0 apples. So is trade mutually beneficial for them? This is a situation where they specialize, and then whatever trade arrangement they come up with is going to be mutually beneficial for them because they're going to be able to buy at lower costs. And we kind of already saw how that works. Because the costs are lower, the prices are going to be lower. But you don't even have to specialize for trade to be mutually beneficial. What does need to happen is it needs to be mutually beneficial. Both sides need to be better off. So if they specialize, or even if they don't, the terms of trade are it's basically just the price that you are paying for the other country's goods, and it doesn't need to be the full opportunity cost. So let's look at an arrangement here to see if this is mutually beneficial, where Canada buys oranges for 2 apples from Australia. So it costs 2 apples, and they get 1 orange out of it. But if they weren't trading, well, then they could get that same orange for 1 apple. So this is an example of terms of trade that could be proposed, but Canada, if they're rational, they're going to say, nah, we're not doing that. 2 apples for 1 orange? 1 apple for 1 orange. We're better off. They wouldn't agree to something like that. But what if they buy oranges at a price of half an apple for 1 orange? So their cost is half an apple. Remember, cost-benefit analysis. This is how we should be making decisions, so we just basically do cost analysis or benefit analysis, and that's it. But if we put them together, half an apple will get you 1 orange. But if they don't trade, that same orange will cost twice as many apples. These are terms of trade that Canada will absolutely accept. 2 apples for 1 orange? No. But half an apple for 1 orange? You bet. So the price has to be less than the opportunity cost. 2 apples is not less than the opportunity cost here, but half an apple is. So they're going to do it. Looking at it from the other side, for Australia, let's say half an apple is the price for an orange if they trade. So if they give up a whole orange to Canada, Canada will give them a fifth of an apple. They just slice it up and here's a fifth of it. Or you give us 5 oranges, we'll give you 1 apple. Well, Australia's not going to do that because for that same orange, they can get a whole third of an apple by themselves. That's more than a fifth for you math junkies out there. So they're not going to go with that. They're not going to sell below their opportunity cost. What if it's half an apple for an orange? 1 orange gets half an apple. Canada upped their offer here. Well, now without trade, 1 orange is only a third of an apple instead of a half. In this case, Australia is absolutely, these are terms of trade that they're going to go with, and they're going to be much happier with it. So, the terms of trade has to be greater than the opportunity cost. So, the production capability is 50 apples or 150 oranges. The opportunity cost, we can calculate it from that sort of thing. Everything in between is a good term of trade. We're not going to necessarily have specialization. We keep these things in mind to figure out what the best terms of trade are. So we can come up with some scenarios where there isn't full specialization. With full specialization, though, that still might be the best thing to do. Australia makes 150 oranges, which is their full capacity. They trade 110 away, keep 40 for themselves. You remember what they were getting. With these terms of trade, what you see is what they were originally doing. The terms of trade being 1 orange for half an apple, where they're specializing in oranges, but they keep 40 and they give away the rest. They don't give away, they trade them at this price. And this is what they're essentially going to get if you do the math there. So 40 oranges and 55 apples is what they get to consume with trade, where before they were consuming 40 apples and 30 oranges. So they absolutely benefited as they're getting more oranges in, or they're exporting more oranges out while importing more apples. They find themselves in a place where, remember, that's 55 apples is what they got. They can only make 50 on their own. Now they get 55, and it didn't cost them anything in oranges. Not in terms of their total ability to consume oranges, because they were consuming 30, and now they get to consume more. They get to consume 40. 40 oranges, 55 apples, more than they could ever do on their own. They are benefiting. But again, the big question here was, what about Canada? They have the absolute advantage in everything. Why should they bother with little bitty Australia? Actually a big country, but whatever. Canada's big too. So why bother? They have absolute advantage in everything. Obviously Australia benefits. We saw how they benefit, but what if Canada, they specialize in making apples and they keep 145 for themselves. Remember, they were consuming 100 of each, producing and consuming 100 of each without trade. Now, they're consuming more apples. They're not producing any oranges, though. Sure, they get 45 more apples, but with these terms of trade, are they going to get more oranges? The answer is, yeah, 110. If you work through the math, with these terms of trade, they specialize, keep this many, trade away 55, which we already saw that they were doing that with Australia. With these terms of trade, they are absolute. They went from 100 oranges and 100 apples to 110 to 145, and we see that on the graph where they started right here, 100 and 100, and then with these terms of trade, 1 orange for half an apple for 1 orange, they specialized making apples and then traded away 55 of them, and then they got those 145 new oranges imported in. So remember how this is unobtainable? It's nice but unobtainable as far as the PPF is concerned. Well, with international trade, this point as far as consumption is concerned is obtainable. Their PPF didn't change. They can't make more than 200 apples. They can't make more than 200 oranges. Nothing shifted out here, but they can still consume more with trade than they could before, as can Australia. Going back here, Australia's on a point beyond their PPF, and Canada is on a point that is beyond their PPF. Both have benefited from trade, even though Canada has absolute advantage in everything. So this is why it is that, again, we can get complicated with the fact that folks in these industries where you're importing more stuff, people in the orange production industry in Canada might lose out, and that's worth giving us pause before allowing for free and open trade without setting some of the terms of trade in a way that's maybe a little more mutually beneficial, but you still have to set those terms in a way that's best for everybody. So it does get a little more complicated, but if we can set those terms of trade in a mutually beneficial arrangement like this, then we get that mutual benefit, and this is why maybe you should buy American, but maybe you also shouldn't worry about it too much, because international trade per se is not necessarily a bad thing.